everyone. Plant-based diets seem to be everywhere these days.
Yeah, they're definitely having a moment.
But we're not just talking trends here, right? We're going deeper. Like, what does the research actually say about how these diets affect how long and how well we live?
Exactly, that's what we're digging into. And we've got two really interesting sources to help us out here.
Okay, cool. So first, we have this big study, the Epic Oxford study.
Right?
And they followed, like, a huge group of people in the UK.
Yeah, over many years.
For a long time. And they were looking at meat eaters, fish eaters, vegetarians, vegans, the whole spectrum.
Exactly, to see how their health differed over time.
So we're talking real hard data.
Real-world data.
And then we also have this white paper from the ACLM.
The American College of Lifestyle Medicine.
Which takes a more practical approach, I'd say.
Yeah, more practical. Like, how can we actually use this information to make choices that help us age well? Because they're really looking at how lifestyle choices, including diet, affect how we age.
Okay, so before we get into all the details, let's just clarify something. When we say plant-based, what do we actually mean?
Yeah, because it can be kind of a vague term.
It can mean a lot of things.
Yeah, for this deep dive, we'll be talking about vegetarian and vegan.
Okay.
Vegetarian, which includes dairy and eggs, and then vegan, which is fully plant-based. No animal products at all.
Perfect. So we're all on the same page. Now let's talk about the good stuff, shall we? Like, what are the plus sides? What are the nutritional wins of eating plant-based?
So one of the biggest things is fiber.
Okay, fiber.
You get a ton of fiber on a plant-based diet, and that's great for your digestion, your gut health.
It's like fiber is the superstar nutrient these days.
Right, it's getting a lot of attention, and for good reason. It's also linked to good heart health.
So we're getting more good stuff. What about the things we get less of?
Yeah, so plant-based diets tend to be much lower in saturated fat,
Okay.
which is the type of fat that raises your what they call bad cholesterol,
Right.
and that can increase the risk of heart disease.
And heart disease is, a huge deal, a leading cause of death globally.
Absolutely. And the Epic Oxford study found that vegetarians had a 23% lower risk of developing heart disease compared to meat eaters.
Wow, 23% is actually a big difference.
It is. And while the study didn't have enough vegans to say for sure about their risk, it did seem like they had a similar trend toward lower heart disease risk.
Interesting. So potentially lower risk of heart disease. Any other big health benefits that jumped out?
Yeah, they also found that vegetarians had a 35% lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes compared to meat eaters.
35%. Wow.
And for vegans, the risk reduction was even greater. Though again, we need to be a bit careful about those numbers because the sample size was smaller.
Right, but still pretty impressive. It kind of seems like there's a pattern here, right?
There does.
Plant-based eating potentially lowering the risk of some major chronic diseases.
It seems like there's a correlation.
And it's not just about specific diseases either, right? Because our second source, the ACLM white paper, talks about these blue zones.
Yes, the blue zones.
I'm always so fascinated by these. The areas around the world where people just live so much longer, healthier lives than average. What's the connection to plant-based diets?
Well, what's really interesting is that all of the blue zones, their diets are mainly plant-based.
Really? All of them?
Pretty much, yeah.
Wow. So can you tell me a little more about one specific blue zone, like what makes them tick?
Sure. So Okinawa, Japan is a great example. Their traditional diet was something like 95% plant-based.
Wow, 95%.
Yeah, a lot of sweet potatoes, green leafy vegetables, and soy products. Meat and dairy.
Not so much.
Very sparingly. But I'm guessing it's not just the food, right?
Right, there's going to be more to it than that.
They're also very active. They have strong social connections, a sense of purpose. All things that likely contribute to their long, healthy lives.
Okay, this is all very compelling, but we also need to be real. No diet is perfect. Are there any risks or downsides to consider with plant-based eating?
That's a great point. Every diet has its nuances. And one of the main concerns with plant-based diets is the potential for nutrient deficiencies.
That makes sense. If you're cutting out whole food groups, you have to be careful to make sure you're still getting what your body needs.
Absolutely, and both our sources highlight this. And the nutrients that tend to be most concerning are vitamin B12, vitamin D, and calcium.
Okay, let's break those down. First, vitamin B12. Why is that a potential issue for people eating plant-based?
Well, vitamin B12 is mainly found in animal products.
Okay.
So for vegans who don't eat any animal products, it can be really tough to get enough B12. And even vegetarians who eat dairy and eggs, they might have lower intakes than meat eaters.
And in fact, the Epic Oxford study found that over half of the vegans they studied had low vitamin B12 levels, right?
Yeah, which is concerning because B12 is crucial for healthy nerve function and making red blood cells.
Right.
And if you're deficient, it can lead to fatigue, anemia, even neurological problems.
So not something to take lightly. Okay, what about vitamin D? What's the concern there?
Well, vitamin D is another one that can be lacking on plant-based diets.
Yeah.
Our bodies can make vitamin D from sunlight, but lots of people, especially if they live in places where there isn't much sun, don't get enough sun exposure.
Right.
And very few foods naturally contain vitamin D.
Including plant foods.
Exactly, and vitamin D is so important for bone health, immune function.
For so many things.
Yeah, and if you're deficient, it can increase the risk of things like osteoporosis, fractures, even infections.
All right, last but not least, calcium. We all know dairy products are high in calcium. How do people on plant-based diets, especially vegans, make sure they're getting enough?
Good question. And while dairy is a good source, there are plenty of plant-based sources too, like leafy greens, things like kale, collard greens, fortified plant milks, tofu.
Okay, so it is possible to get these nutrients on a plant-based diet, but it sounds like it takes planning, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's not as simple as just cutting out meat. It's about replacing those foods with nutrient-rich alternatives.
Right.
And for some people, especially vegans, supplements might be necessary. It's always best to talk to a doctor or a registered dietitian to get personalized advice.
Great advice. Now, speaking of things that might need extra planning, the Epic Oxford study had a pretty surprising finding about fracture risk.
Oh yes, that was unexpected.
They found that vegetarians and especially vegans actually had a higher risk of bone fractures than meat eaters.
Right, which you wouldn't necessarily expect given that plant-based diets are often promoted as being good for bone health.
Right, I was surprised by that too. So what's the explanation?
Well, it's not completely clear, but the researchers suggested a few possible factors. One is BMI.
Body mass index.
Exactly. Vegetarians and vegans tend to have lower BMIs. And lower BMI, especially as we get older, can increase the risk of fractures, especially hip fractures.
So it might not be the diet itself, but like a consequence of the diet.
That's one possibility. They also thought that lower vitamin D levels in vegans might be playing a role. And they even brought up the question of protein intake. Now, the study didn't find that vegans generally had low protein intake,
Okay.
but they couldn't rule out the possibility that it could be a factor in some cases.
Interesting. So more research needed, but it's definitely something to think about if you're considering a plant-based diet, especially a vegan one.
Exactly.
It highlights the need for careful planning. Maybe working with a doctor to make sure you're getting enough of those key nutrients and taking care of your bone health.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about some potential nutrient concerns. Let's tackle another big question. Protein. This has got to be on everyone's mind. Can you really get enough protein on a plant-based diet?
The protein question.
It always comes up.
It's understandable. We've all heard that we need protein to build and repair tissues, keep our muscles strong, and just for overall health.
Right.
And as we age, our protein needs actually go up a bit.
Really? Why is that?
Well, as we get older, we tend to lose some muscle mass naturally. It's called sarcopenia.
Okay.
And to help counteract that, we need a bit more protein.
Makes sense. So how much are we talking about, and can plant-based diets actually deliver?
So the recommended daily intake for protein is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. Or if you think in pounds, about 0.36 grams per pound. But for older adults, experts recommend bumping that up to 1 to 1.5 grams per kilogram.
Okay.
So for someone who weighs, say, 150 pounds, that would be around 100 to 150 grams of protein per day.
Okay, so a decent amount.
Yeah, and yes, plant-based diets can totally provide that.
Okay, good to know. So what are some good plant-based protein sources that people can try?
Oh, there's so many options. Legumes, things like lentils, beans, chickpeas.
Great sources of protein.
Excellent sources. Also nuts and seeds, almonds, walnuts, chia seeds.
Classic.
And of course, we can't forget tofu and tempeh. Those are plant-based protein staples.
It really is amazing how many choices there are.
It is. And the ACLM white paper points out that there's no evidence that animal protein is better than plant protein for building and maintaining muscle mass, especially for older adults.
Really?
So you can get all the protein you need from plants.
That's great news. Okay, we've covered the physical health side of things, but what about quality of life? Like, how do plant-based diets affect our overall well-being?
That's an important point, and it's something the ACLM white paper talks about too. They discuss this idea of healthy aging, which isn't just about being free from disease.
Right.
It's about cognitive function, mental health, social well-being. It's about thriving.
I love that. It's about more than just surviving. It's about truly living well.
Exactly. And there's more and more evidence suggesting that plant-based diets can help support healthy aging in all these ways. For example, the ACLM white paper talks about the MIND diet, which is a way of eating that focuses on plant foods,
Okay.
and it's been linked to better cognitive function and even a lower risk of Alzheimer's disease.
Wow, so eating more plants could actually be good for our brains as well as our bodies.
It seems that way. And they even conclude a couple of anecdotes in the white paper about older men. One was 82 and the other was 85, who saw improvements in their cognitive function after switching to plant-based diets.
Wow, that's amazing. It's incredible to think about how much power food really has to affect our lives.
It really is.
Yeah, it's really pretty amazing. But you know what? I want to change gears a little bit. The ACLM white paper talked about some practical advice, like how to actually transition to a more plant-based diet. Can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. They emphasize taking it slow. Like, don't go all in, totally vegan or vegetarian overnight. Instead, just start by adding more plant-based meals into your week.
That sounds much more doable, like baby steps. Small changes add up over time, right?
Exactly. It's
Really?
way more sustainable that way. They also talk about meal planning being key. If you have healthy plant-based meals and snacks already prepped, ready to go, it's just so much easier to stick with it.
Oh, I'm all about that. It's like setting yourself up for success. Any other pearls of wisdom from the ACLM folks?
Oh yeah. They also stressed how important it is to find plant-based recipes that you actually enjoy eating.
Right, because if it doesn't taste good, what's the point?
Exactly. It shouldn't feel like a chore. There are so many creative, flavorful, plant-based dishes out there.
Speaking of creativity, I'm curious about your thoughts on this whole personalized nutrition thing. The ACLM white paper touched on that a little bit. What's your take?
Yeah, personalized nutrition. It's a super interesting area of research. The idea is that one day we might be able to create diets tailored to our individual genes and lifestyles.
So, like, imagine a plant-based diet designed specifically for you based on your unique needs.
Exactly. That's the goal. It's still early days, but the potential is huge.
That's pretty mind-blowing. It really makes me think about everything we've talked about in this deep dive. We've looked at the science behind plant-based diets, the pros and cons, even some practical tips for making the switch.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have. And at the end of the day, the decision to go plant-based is, well, it's a personal one.
Absolutely. It's a choice that requires some thought and reflection.
Definitely. And it's always a good idea to talk to your doctor or a registered dietitian for personalized advice.
Absolutely.
So to our listener out there, we encourage you to take what you've learned from this deep dive and use it to make the best choices for you. The goal is to live a long, healthy, and happy life, and we hope this has given you some things to consider.
Well said. Here's to a long, healthy, and happy life.
Cheers to that. And until next time, keep diving deep into the world of knowledge. But it does feel like we just scratched the surface,
Yeah, there's always more to learn, right?
For sure. But I think we've given our listener a pretty good foundation.
I think so too, yeah.
We've seen that there are some real potential benefits to these plant-based diets, especially when it comes to preventing those chronic diseases. But it's not as easy as just saying, okay, no more meat, no more dairy. There's more to it.
Right,
It's not that simple.
As we discussed, you really have to think about those nutrients.
Right.
Be aware of those potential deficiencies,
Mm.
like B12, vitamin D, calcium,
Yeah.
and have a plan for addressing them.
And I really like how the ACLM white paper gave us some actual practical tips for making that transition, like start slow, focus on meal planning, find those recipes that you actually like. It
Yeah.
just makes it seem less daunting, I think.
I agree. They really drive home the point that it's not about being perfect.
Yeah.
It's about making progress.
Exactly. It's about finding what works for you. And hey, maybe in the future, we'll all have these personalized plant-based diets
Oh, right.
tailored just for us thanks to all these advances in personalized nutrition.
That would be amazing.
That's so cool to think about. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listener with something to think about. If you were thinking about adding more plant-based meals to your diet, what would your first step be?
Oh, that's a great question. And I'd say definitely check out those resources we talked about. The Epic Oxford study, the ACLM white paper, they have a ton of great information to help guide you.
Awesome. Happy exploring, everyone. And until next time, keep diving deep into the world of knowledge.